the cloud. Hey, we're not going to have enough board members for a quorum on anything. Do you guys want to reschedule to next week?
Sure.
Okay. It's you, me, and Harold, and I think maybe one other person. No, it's you, me, and Harold.
Good evening, everybody.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, Scott.
Sorry about the background noise. Just finishing up with the doctor appointment, heading back to the book cycle.
You can go on mute.
That would work.
Oh, it's not even 7 o'clock yet, is it?
No, it is. 7:03. So let's go ahead and get
I've
started.
got some work.
7:03. My computer's not caught up.
You sure it's a computer?
It's off 2 minutes. I see my phone's on exact. Oh, well.
User error.
I've been having some internet issues here. I wonder if it's the frozen tundra around here, not to mention the lines.
It's a snow. Well, let's get started. We've got John Bailey's going to be our speaker. John Cram was supposed to send his bio over. So I'm going to let him introduce himself.
All right. Good evening, fellow Rotarians. It's my pleasure to present to you this evening. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our family and our family's military service to our great country. My father was a 50-year Rotarian of the York Rotary Club. I'm a 38-year Rotarian of the Hanover Rotary Club, and John Cram is one of my past district governors. My daughter, who works for us in our transportation business, has been a Rotarian for 7 years. And I was very pleased that just 2 months ago, my son that took a sales position for a local company asked me about joining Rotary, and he joined my Hanover Rotary Club just 2 months ago. So between all of us, my father down to my son, we have almost 100 years a Rotary. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my father, Captain Fred J. Bailey. My father was a captain in the U.S. Army during World War II. He was drafted when he was 27 years of age. And that was the maximum age you could be drafted at. Not sure if it was that now, but it was at that time. And on his first day in the Army, he did a forced march from Baltimore, Maryland to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And that's about 60 miles one way. They taught him to be a mule wrangler. He was leading a mule. And they were going to send him over to Burma and up through Italy. In that area, they originally talked about it with a howitzer on his mule. He ended up in supply as a sergeant in Texas, and he wrote a letter to his commanding officer, which when I wrote for his records, he told me he wrote that letter, and by golly, that letter was in there. And the letter that he wrote said that he had far greater talents to provide to his country, and that he wanted to go into OCS school. So he went to OCS school, came out as a newly minted lieutenant. He was sent to Great Britain. He was stationed in Great Britain in early 1944. And my brother and I found my father's his orders, his 201 file, when he passed away back in 2005. And some things Dad talked about and other things he didn't talk about. And in that file, after we read this, we were amazed. And my brother and I decided we were going to go to Europe for 2 weeks and follow his footsteps. So hence our father's footsteps. And I took this on Omaha Beach. This is my father, Captain Fred J. Bailey. He served in active duty from 1941 to 45. And then he served in the reserves from 45 to 53. He was in the 8th Army, and he was assigned to General Simpson, was his commanding general. When they got to Europe, there was already an 8th Army. So they renamed this the 9th Army, and that's his patch. And the 9th Army, or the 8th Army that was already in Great Britain was commanded by General Montgomery. So that's why they changed it to the 9th Army. My father was awarded the Bronze Star. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. These are my father's medals. These are the medals he earned as he went through his various countries and different conflicts that he went through. He had sent all these home to his sister that lived in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And when he got home after the war was over, his sister had passed away when he was over in Europe. And due to the war going on, of course, you couldn't come home for your sister's funeral. His brother had sold all of his medals, and he didn't have any of his medals except for his Bronze Star that he was given, and he carried that with him. So I found out about a place called Medals of America for a veteran that worked for us in our company. I ordered these. My brother and I got these mounted for him and a nice plaque, and we were going to give these to him at Christmas in 2005, and he passed away at 91 years of age in March of 2005. We never got to give them to him. So it was a shame that he never had his medals that he earned going through his 5 countries in Europe. Again, Dad he was a licensed mortician when he went in the Army, so he ended up being the Grazing Registration Officer for the 1st and 9th Armies. And Dad was assigned to company headquarters, and this is how the Grazing Registrations process worked. You had platoons, down to sections, down to collection, or down to squads. And it took a whole lot of people, and we never really think about the people picking up the dead. And not only the American and the Allied soldiers, we had to go in and take care of the German soldiers also. And my dad helped set up some German cemeteries. So the collecting squad would go in, mainly German prisoners would go in there, because my father told me a lot of the bodies would be booby-trapped by the American soldiers. They'd roll them over and a grenade would go off, go to a collecting station. Then they'd take them to the division, Grazing Registration, Service and Clearing, where they'd strip the bodies, account for all their personal effects, send those back home, and then they would take them to the burial site. Many of those were just temporary graveyards. Some are still graveyards today. Then after the war was over, if the soldier wished to be buried in Europe and had stated that, they would stay in Europe, or the family could request to have the remains sent home. We started our journey. We flew to Paris, took a train over to Lorient, France, and we wanted to visit the Carrier-Roman shipyards for a twofold purpose. Dad participated in the Battle of Brest, which was the fight to take a deep water seaport in Brest. And that was in July, and I think it was August and September of 1944. And we wanted that for a deep water seaport. There's no museum that's open there now. So we went here because there was a museum that's open, and there's 7 buildings that look like this. And we bombed them night after night after night, and they used slave labor to build this in 40 and 41. And this is where the Germans operated their submarines. They go right out into the deep seawater. Look how thick those walls are. It's just absolutely incredible. 1 of 7 buildings, just absolutely amazing. And we bombed them every night, and they just kept, it didn't really even faze them. Another reason we went there is this is my mother, Lieutenant Melna Farmer Bailey. She was originally from Montgomery, Alabama, graduated from the University of Alabama. She was a dietitian in the medical corps. After the war was over, she and my father met. My father was setting up a mortuary in her hospital. They went out on a double date together, but they didn't go out together. Mom went out with Dad's roommate, Dad went out with Mom's roommate, but till the night was over, they switched. And so I'm before you tonight because they switched. And she served through the end of the war, and then she was over there working until the end of 1949 when she received her honorable discharge from the U.S. Army. Another reason that we went over was to visit my mom's secretary, Denise Verbreau. We had been corresponding with her for over 70 years. She was my mom's secretary. She spoke English and did typing and was a clerk for my mother. That's my brother, Jim. He served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era. And that's me on the right, and then Denise in the middle. And it was just a great pleasure to get to meet her. And I called my mother, and they got to talk and cry and have a good time. The first visit to a graveyard was Levitzen, France, where my father worked for German prisoners. And this is maintained by the German Republic, German people at this time. All the German cemeteries are, and there's quite a few over there. Then we went on to the Brittany American Cemetery, 28 acres, 4,408 headstones, 498 MIAs, 21 sets of brothers. Just unbelievable that you'd have 21 sets of brothers in one cemetery. All of these are maintained by the United States on local land. It's not U.S. territory, and they're operated by the American Battlefield Monument Commission. This is the way that the cards are laid out. You either have a Christian cross or you have a Star of David. It doesn't matter who you are, and when you fell, you were buried next to a private, could be a colonel, could be a general. Here is a Medal of Honor winner or awardee, and there's only one exception to this. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Everyone's numbered, and then they're corresponded as far as their, what branch of service they were in and what they did. Just incredible how they kept their records. All crosses are facing the west towards the USA. And then a lot of them have chapels that we were able to go up and get pictures. We did a quick visit to Mont Saint Michel. This is a Sunday morning. We thought we could hit a church service there. However, they don't do a church service there, but it was a Catholic pilgrimage built back in 708. It was also occupied by the Nazis. They carried every single stone up there and placed that when that was built. And I can't imagine how long that took. It took us 45 minutes to walk from the bottom up to the top. Just absolutely incredible. And when the ocean comes in, it creates a moat around Mont Saint Michel. If you have an opportunity, visit it. Absolutely incredible. We went on to Caen. This is the way Caen looks today. This is the way it looked prior to World War II. We bombed it. There was really nothing left of it when we went in. This is just a brief map of the Normandy beaches. I didn't realize how big they were. It was 50 miles from Utah to Sword Beach. And you can see what sectors we had and what sectors the other allies had. Then we went to visit the World War II Museum. Ironically enough, it's on Dwight Eisenhower Boulevard. Dwight Eisenhower Boulevard, or Dwight Eisenhower, is, from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where John Cram's from. My wife's from Gettysburg. She actually went to school, elementary school, with the Eisenhower granddaughter. They were in the same class. She had Secret Service standing outside there. That was built over top of the command center that the Germans had for that sector. Then we went over to Armage, France, and you can see that there's a relic out there in the ocean of one of the landing crafts. Here's a landing craft, left as a relic. Flags of appreciation just flew everywhere. It was just absolutely amazing. When we were driving into St. Mary Glees, I stopped and went back, and my brother took a picture. They're a sister city to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, which I thought was ironic. St. Mary Glees was the first city that was liberated in France by Americans, by the 101st Airborne. And these are bullet holes. Under the Geneva Convention, they're not supposed to shoot at paratroopers. Paratroopers aren't supposed to shoot at the ground. But the Germans, they had a fire at a barn that night, from what they told us. And they could see these parachutes coming down, so everybody started shooting at everybody. Here's a fence in the main yard in the square that took one. And then the Romans were here many years before we were. They told us they had Roman mile markers every mile going back to Rome from St. Mary Glees. That's my brother. I think most of you have probably seen the movie The Longest Day. This is a mannequin of John Steele that got hung up there, got shot in the foot, was taken prisoner, then was escaped, liberated, and went on to fight through the end of the war. This is a picture of the inside of the church there that John Steele was hanging on. And you can see over on the right-hand side, it has a paratrooper coming down. They're very thankful for what the American and the Allied soldiers did for them in liberating them from the Germans. This is a picture of this church. We were driving past here. Again, I just stopped and took a picture because it's right by Omaha Beach. And you can see the devastation from the bombing and the shelling of what the church looked like after the war, with the American GIs going past the way it's rebuilt today. There were markers everywhere of remembrance. This guy was clearing mines, was killed in action on D-Day on June 6, 1944. Went on to Utah Beach. These are some of the relics left over from the German gun emplacements. And, Hitler built his Atlantic Wall thinking it was impenetrable. But of course, he didn't realize the might of the American and the Allied Army. This little bit closer look. This is inside of one of the gun emplacements. And then we were shelling them from the ocean. This is one of the craters from one of the shells that came in from the ocean from one of the battleships. Pretty large. They told us they overshot most of the gun emplacements. That's why we didn't destroy more of the gun emplacements. This is machine gun spray inside the building. This is what the Germans had to look out and see a picture of when they saw those hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of ships that came over across the English Channel. Then we went on to Pointe du Hoc, and these were the cliffs that were climbed by the U.S. Army Rangers. Then we went on to Omaha Beach, and this is where I took that picture. This is what it looks like today. And there would have been a lot of, anti-tanks, mines, different things, barriers that were put up by the Germans, barbed wire that we had to get through. And we came in at low tide. They thought we'd come in at high tide. And we came in at low tide. And they had a long way to go across that beach just to even get up to where the Germans were. Then we went to the Normandy American Cemetery. Now this was really in the 50s, mid-50s into the early 60s is when this cemetery was built. When they did the 70th anniversary a couple years ago with Tom Brokaw, this is a shot where they opened up. It's 172 acres, 9,300 headstones, 1,500 MIAs, and 45 sets of brothers that are there today. And they were brought from other cemeteries. This is a wall that lists all the MIAs. And if you go into battle, they can't find you. They'll list you on this wall. If your remains are found, then they put a rosette by your name, and then they'll intern your remains, either send them home or they'll bury you in that graveyard. We visited Theodore Roosevelt, was there. He died July the 12th, 1944. He came ashore and was instrumental in taking the beaches. His brother, Quentin, had died during World War I, and they brought his body over and planted him next to his brother. Of course, it's overlooking Normandy Beach, just a beautiful view. A lot of native plants, a lot of native trees. Then we went to the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten, Holland. And my father always told my brother and I that he was, responsible for building of a cemetery in Europe. And we thought this was the one because his orders, he was there from October until April. So he worked there for a long time. And on Memorial Day, they have a service every single year there. And my father ordered the first Memorial Day service. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Local families have adopted these graves. They're in their third generation of family members that come and bring flowers on the soldier's birthday, on Memorial Day. And it's just absolutely incredible that we saw some of the families and some of the small children bringing flowers. The cemetery today is 65.5 acres, 8,300 headstones, 1,172 MIAs, and 40 sets of brothers. As I discussed, local families have adopted these graves and in their third generation. It's very beautiful. This is somebody that dug these beautiful, beautiful flowers here that day. The way it's laid out as most of them are. Most of them are Kentucky bluegrass. This is our local guide, Frank LaHaye. He's a Hollander, very knowledgeable in the graveyard, and told us about it and gave us just almost a whole day he spent with my brother and I. And he told us about this book that was written called Crosses in the Wind. And you can look this up on Google. Just type in Crosses in the Wind. You can bring it up and read it online. A Captain Schulman wrote this book in 1947. And it talked about the building of the American Cemetery in Margraten, Holland. I did a search on Bailey in the book in Google when I brought it up. And my father's name came up about 9 different times in the book. And in here, it states that my father gave the order to begin. If you look down under page 63, it says, Captain Bailey, Graves and Registrations Officer for the 9th Army, approved the choice. Yes, this would be the location of the 9th Army Military Cemetery. Everyone was happy for the new site. We couldn't get started operating fast enough. They started the cemetery about 10 miles farther towards the front, towards Berlin. And when they brought in heavy equipment to start the cemetery, the Germans saw the heavy equipment, thought it was a forward operating base they were setting up, and they started to shell it. Colonel shut it down, and when he shut it down, he told my father to go out and find another place for an appropriate cemetery. He sent Schulman out. Schulman found it, and then Schulman ended up coming back, reporting to my father, and then they built the cemetery. My father also received his Bronze Star for work that he did here. It talks about mud and rain. That's about all they had the whole time. They actually had to cut down trees. I got these pictures off some archives and put trees in there because all their vehicles were sinking down in the mud, and they brought stones in from riverbeds, from rivers miles away, and put them in. And this is what my father received his Bronze Star for, and we have documentation of that. So I was able to get these pictures out of archives. This is the way the cemetery looked. All the graves were dug by hand. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. This is a video of my father in the lower left-hand corner. That is my father working in the cemetery. I spent an incredible amount of time. That's Captain Bailey walking out of the grave. I spent just an incredible amount of time doing research and found an actual video in the archives of my father. This is the way the graveyard looked at the end of the war in 1945, in June of 1945. And there were 17,000 American and Allied soldiers buried in this main part of the cemetery, the largest cemetery in Europe, very largest cemetery in Europe. If you look in the foreground in the back, there was another 5,000 German soldiers that were buried back in there. This is the way it looked, all wooden crosses. When the war was over, my father, and again, we found this in this book, he wanted to have a Memorial Day service. The main problem is he ordered to have flowers put on every single grave. There were 17,000 graves he ordered to have flowers put on. So the day before the services, he sent his 20 deuce-and-a-half trucks out, collected flowers from 60 villages, brought them in piles to the cemetery. Nearly 200 men and women and children worked all night placing wreaths and flowers on the graves. General Simpson, who was his commanding general, 16 other generals representing all the corps and divisions were attendants at that service. That service still continues today. My brother and I plan on taking our children and grandchildren back over there one of these days. These are just pictures of the ceremony from that day. We went on to Henry Chapal Cemetery, 57 acres, 37 sets of brothers, one set of 3 brothers. I just can't imagine that mother when she got that news about losing 3 sons. Just a beautiful cemetery. Then we went on to the Ardennes American Cemetery. Chapel was under construction, so we couldn't get in there. However, the superintendent there we met, who's in the middle, Mike Yashanik, he happened to be from York, Pennsylvania, from where we are. And his son went to Penn State. That's his wife. She worked in an attorney's office next to our travel office for many years, and we would wave at each other, but we didn't know each other. And then I'd go to Europe and meet her in a graveyard. And he used to be the superintendent of the Netherlands American Cemetery, my dad's graveyard. Then we went on to Clairvaux. The reason we went to Clairvaux is my father had been there, and he was sent there in November. This is a respite site. And this was the first town that was shelled by the Nazis during the Battle of the Bulge. I was cleaning out the basement of our travel office when we were getting ready to move to another location. And I found a letter that my father wrote on the 7th of February, 1945. And he had written it to his uncle in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. You can see the envelope on the right-hand side. And he wrote that our snow's all gone, and we are now waiting for the rain to stop and the sun to shine. As usual, King Mud is having a busy day. Some months ago, I sent you a picture of Clairvaux, a very beautiful city in Belgium and very near the border of Holland and Germany. In the background was a forest where quite a scrap took place. It's a shame of the condition of that town today. I doubt if it'll ever rebuilt. That scrap he talked about was Battle of the Bulge. I'm assuming he was sent back there in February because they were still digging bodies out because they were all frozen, and they were digging bodies out and they were burying the dead. So that was amazing that that was in there, and this is the way it looks today. It was rebuilt. It was just absolutely beautiful. This is the largest World War II monument in Europe. It's in Bastogne. We visited the headquarters. They got surrounded by the Germans during Battle of the Bulge. And then that's the Nuts General, General McCullough. And then they sent Old Blood and Guts, Patton in to break the line and rescue the American 101st. Then we went on to Luxembourg American Cemetery. And some of you may have visited that. Today it's 50 acres, 5,000 headstones, 371 MIAs, and 22 sets of brothers. General George Patton is buried here because he died over in Europe. And this is his grave. So when Patton was originally buried in the cemetery in Luxembourg, so many soldiers were coming to visit his grave day after day after day. They were desecrating all the graves around his grave, and they were having to rebuild that every night. So the decision was made to remove his body, re-prepare it, and then they reburied him what was at the back of the graveyard. This is now the front of the graveyard when you come in. My father was the one that was responsible for digging him up, re-preparing his body, and then reburying him where he lays today. And I know he told me, because I asked him, I said, did you bury him with his pearl pistols on? He said, yes, I did. I want to talk next about my Uncle Jack Meeker. He was a lieutenant, and he was in Patton's Army. This was taken that I got from my cousin. And this is my Uncle Jack's helmet. My Uncle Jack Meeker always had a big chunk of meat missing out of the top right of his ear. And the reason that he had the top right of his ear missing, when he was crossing the Rhine River with Patton's Army, he sent 2 men up. He was a lieutenant with a machine gun crew, sent 2 men up, and they were mowed down. He sent 2 more men up at the 50 cal. They were mowed down. He grabbed the gun, went up, started returning fires to the Germans. He told me he turned and looked to the right and saw a silhouette of a German soldier, and then that's all he remembers is a muzzle flash. So that bullet came in the right side of his helmet, tore the top of his ear off, went out the back, and this is the inside of his helmet liner, and you can see it has his name written in it. My cousin lives out in Michigan and has this helmet today, and the story continues that when he got patched up, he went across the Rhine River on his own, found his radio man. They were in a small village, and they were refreshing themselves in a fountain. And when they were refreshing themselves, they were surrounded by Germans and taken prisoner. The Germans shot the radio man because he was an enlisted officer. And then the Germans took him prisoner and sent him to a POW camp for officers. He received the Silver Star for what he did, never talked about it. And he described this to me a couple months before he passed away when I went to visit him in Heppenheim, Germany. And my brother and I found this place. It was an insane asylum prior to World War II. When they needed room for the American and Allied soldiers, they took all the insane people out, lined them up against the fence, and just shot them all. That's what the Germans did to get rid of and make room for the prisoners. This is a local man, Gerhard Losen, that befriended us, took us in, got us information. I got a book to give to my cousin. But my uncle described this to the T, that on Good Friday, 1945, he woke up. He had been a prisoner there for approximately 2 weeks. The only thing he had in 2 weeks to eat was bread made of sawdust and water to drink, and that was it. He was hungry. He was tired. He got up on Good Friday. He had multiple beatings day after day after day, and he got up, and he didn't hear anybody speaking German. He and another fellow went outside and were standing out in this area where we were, and they heard heavy machinery coming, and he said, in pulled this Jeep. Now, this is the American section where he was lodged, where he stayed. That's what they told us. In pulled a Jeep, and out of the Jeep got General Jacob Devers. General Devers is from York, Pennsylvania, believe it or not. So General Devers came up to my uncle, and my uncle told me that he gave the best salute he could give a commanding general under the circumstances. And he said General Devers gave him a hug and said, Lieutenant, I can't believe the condition of you and your men. What can we do for you? And my uncle said, General, it sure would be nice to have bacon and eggs. And he said after he made that statement, he couldn't believe he would tell a 4-star general he wanted bacon and eggs for breakfast. He said the general looked at his colonel, and he said, how about if we have all these men, there was about 220 men, in Paris on Easter morning between white sheets with bacon and eggs for breakfast. His colonel looked at him and said, General, there's no way. All the men and equipment are heading east towards Berlin. There's no way to get equipment in here and get these men evacuated out and fly them out to Paris. He said the general looked at the colonel and just very softly said, let's make that an order, and walked away. And my uncle said at that time he realized the power of a general, because all these men and equipment started coming in to evacuate them. And when he woke up on Easter morning, he was between white sheets and brought bacon and eggs for breakfast. Now, this last June, I went to an antique bus show. I'm in the motor coach industry. and I went to one in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and I met this fella that was used to be a sergeant and MP, and he had an antique bus that was a military bus that was used for prisoners. And I started talking with him and told him I was from York. And he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "General Devers is from York." I said, "How do you know that?" He says, "My father was his colonel." So his father was Colonel Schroedel. I sent a newspaper article was written about my uncle and how he was liberated, and we've exchanged some things back and forth, and there's a local man writing a book about it. But for me to run into the guy's son that liberated my father, again, was just absolutely amazing. This is the graveyard behind where the compound was, where they had buried all the people after they dug them out of the ditch and gave them proper burials. Then we went on to Nuremberg. And the reason we went to Nuremberg is my father, when he came home after the war, couldn't find a job, he went back over and worked as an independent contractor in graves and registrations for about another 3.5, almost 4 years. He was sent to Nuremberg as a civilian, and he sat as a witness during the Nuremberg trials in courtroom 600. And again, the hair stood up on the back of my neck when I walked in there. So when I went in there in courtroom 600 and sat down, I couldn't believe my father had sat there over 70 years ago. And my father sat as a witness. Now, if you remember that they put the Nazis on trial November 20th to October 1st, 1946, and they ended up hanging him. But the night before they were going to hang him, Hermann Goering committed suicide. And who do you think they called on to go into his cell and take him out was Captain Bailey. Now they say that, you know, his guard gave him a cyanide capsule. My father told me that he was very heavy and he had a flaps sewed into his stomach at his belly button and had a cyanide capsule in there. And that's where he had a cyanide capsule because my father got to examine him. So he is hanging here with the other Nazis. Even though he's dead, they wouldn't let him escape the hangman. After they were hung, then they decided they were going to cremate all the Nazis because they didn't want them to become martyrs. So they were given, again, to Captain Bailey, and they were taken down to Dachau. This is Dachau, how it was at the end of the war. I had over 50,000 prisoners. They gave my father the bodies of the Nazis that were hung. He fired the furnaces in Dachau for the last time, and he cremated the remains of them. He disposed of their ashes in the Isar River. And these are the furnaces, the way they were when my brother and I visited there. This is what they would find when they went into a lot of the camps. My father went into many, many camps because they had to send the graves and registrations people in there. This is just a slide showing you deaths with World War II as the most. We visited 5 countries. We traveled 12,000 miles in 15 days and 14 nights following our father through Europe. And I found this quote that I really like: "Never let the memory of your father lay unforgotten. He could never say die, and we always need men like him." And General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff in World War II, had made that quote, and I really like that concerning my father. I'm very thankful I'm American, and in God I do trust, and I thank you for your time this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
What a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much, John.
It's my pleasure. I enjoy telling the story. It's one that my father really never talked about because he said war was too terrible to remember. But, you know, to be able to visit a place where my uncle was held prisoner, to be able to be in the courtroom where my father sat as a witness, and to be able to go to the cemetery that I know that my father, and to be able to find documentation and even video footage of it, I think it's just incredible.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Incredible.
John, this is John Cram. Thanks again for making this presentation. Sorry I'm late. I'm in Lexington, Virginia, and I've been traveling all day.
That's okay.
It's a real eye-opener.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
gosh.
thank you. And thank you for your service to our great country, John.
This is absolutely fantastic. I've many times, my grandfather was a China Marine, and to hear him talk about his time in Korea and China, I would love to be able to do what you guys were able to do. That's really cool.
Yeah, well, I can't wait until we take the children and the grandchildren back over, and we're going to go to the Memorial Day service that my father gave the very first one, you know, 75 years ago to start. So it's just absolutely incredible. So if there's nothing else, everybody have a great evening and a good week, okay?
And same to you.
John, again, thank you so much.
Thank you all. God bless you all.
Proper
Thank you.
introduction, John?
Pardon me?
Did you get a proper introduction?
No.
Yep, I got a proper introduction.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
So,
Yeah, John is a good Rotarian in the Hanover Club, which is, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes from Gettysburg. Owns Bailey Coach, and he's done a lot to help our district. Especially, he donated the use of a motor coach for a year. He wrapped it with Rotary logo stuff. Did you show a picture of that, or did you have one?
No, I did not.
Okay. I don't
didn't.
have one. I just got here.
Yeah.
But it's nice. To have,
I may, hang on here. Let me just take a quick peek here and see. I may be able to.
it's nice to have Rotarians like John.
814. Hang on here. Yeah. So here is, it'll come up here.
There it is.
Cool.
Okay.
awesome.
So, and what I did is we donated a month of service to do humanitarian projects for Rotary. So I've actually had people follow the bus for quite a few miles and then pull in behind the driver and say, "Where did you get this bus? I'm a Rotarian at so-and-so." We've even had, we were in New York City one day, and, a fellow from France was a Rotarian, was taking pictures and couldn't believe it. So, I was Polio Plus chairman at my club back, 20-some years ago when they kicked off Polio Plus. And I wanted to really do something to try to spread the word of what we've done to almost eliminate polio throughout the world. We also have the 4-way test on the back. That's a little bit closer picture. I don't have one of the other side, so that's what I have. So, but we have a lot of fun with it, and we use it on a regular charter service with groups and go all over. And we've just given a better understanding of what Rotary is. And we actually had it at the RI convention in Toronto this year. We took it up there with a group of Rotarians from our district.
Very good.
Yep. So, okay, everybody. Well, have a good evening, and thank you.
Thank you.
Great story.
Thanks, John.
Yep. See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, John, is he in Spring Grove, Pennsylvania? Is that right?
No, he's in Hanover, Pennsylvania.
I was trying to find the website, make sure I shared the right one.
He's still connected with us. I don't think he realizes it.
Let me see if I can unshare him.
So I was just listening to the whole story in the helmet on the way home, and I definitely got to watch it to see the pictures now. Once you post it.
Oh, the poor guy doesn't know that we're connected.
No.
He can't hear us either, can he?
No.
Oops.
There.
Oh, there he goes.
Very good. Everybody's quiet.
Behaving
After that presentation, holy mackerel.
That was good.
Sort of like being shell-shocked.
Really?
Follow then.
Yeah, he gave that presentation to our club, and everybody we had the same reaction.
Oh, they should.
World War II is not that far off. It's one generation for us old guys.
Right.
Well, my father was in France right at the same time, in working in a hospital. So a lot of that comes home to roost.
Sure it does.
We hear lots about France and how they do or don't treat Americans, but I can tell you that northeast area up there, or northwest area up there, I've been in the same area working, and it's amazing how the people are and how they really, really honor Americans in that part of the world.
My uncle kept a diary of his time in World War II, and I read it. And as I got further into it, I found out that he stayed at the same caserne that I did when I was a private. I thought that was just so weird.
Wow.
My dad was a naval commander, and he was one of those that did not talk about World War II.
Yeah.
When I would ask him, he would just get kind of glazed over and look far away and say, "You can read about it."
We got a fair amount of that history out here in Alameda. You probably seen the news. They've located the wreck of the CV-8, the Hornet.
The Hornet, I saw that.
Yeah.
We've got the CV-12 docked out here in Alameda where I live. It's, 7 miles from where I sit. Well, not even, like 3 miles from where I sit right now.
Oh, wow.
It's a museum. It's excellent. And just seeing, getting more of these stories about what these guys did and what it was like to live on the carrier and so on.
Refresh my memory. What was the Hornet known for?
Jimmy Doolittle's raid.
Exactly.
Launch of the, right, that's correct.
Yeah, 2 blocks away, we've got South Shore Mall, and I've got a plaque on the wall there about Jimmy Doolittle and describing that raid.
Mm-hmm.
And so there at the shopping mall, it's kind of neat. You can read all these stories of the old military history of Alameda and some other things too, non-military.
Mm-hmm.
I meant to ask before our speaker, but he showed the gravesite of a Theodore Roosevelt. Which Theodore Roosevelt was that?
Teddy's son.
Yeah, that was Teddy Roosevelt's. I thought that was his grandson.
Oh, maybe grandson. Maybe it was, yeah.
He was the first general onto the beaches at Normandy.
Right.
And if you watch the D-Day movie with John Wayne, it's a little, I know it's hard to believe, but a little over dramatized, but he was up close and personal.
Yeah.
You talk about the Pacific. I understand that the Arizona is now closed off to public viewing.
It is.
Which is a shame. My dad went there, and as he was reading the names of the deceased, found his own name. And, a name like Cram is unusual. And I don't think he ever determined if they were related, but that'd have to be weird to find your name on that.
Yeah.
Amanda, you got a little extra attachment there.
Thank you.
I don't know how attached I really am.
Camp Tech, nice.
Hi, Mike.
You only came home because I was making dinner.
It's a good reason.
He hasn't tasted it yet. He asked me if I want wine, so he can stay.
That's
It's not quite time out west.
He did something wrong. He brought a really good bottle home.
No, I bought it a while ago.
15 more minutes, Scott, and it's legal.
Okay.
legal.
Yeah, I'm feeling like an old guy today. I just got back from Kaiser where I had my hearing evaluated to back up my VA claim for hearing loss. It's like, yeah, I got some high frequency loss. So I don't know.
Isn't this your birthday, Scott?
It is. Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy
It's
birthday,
been a rough
Scott.
one. Thank you. It's good to be here.
You want to borrow this, Scott?
What's that?
You want to borrow this?
I might need to. They told me the VA has the best hearing aids. They're a better deal than what I get at Kaiser. So
I am. I'm supposed to get hearing aids. Or hearing aid anyway.
mm-hmm.
I haven't succumbed yet, but I'm past due. I've got the loss in both ears.
What was that?
Higher range.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is very significant in this ear. And the doctor did a bunch of tests, and he traced it way back to when I used to shoot for the Army. I used to shoot small bore rifles for the Army.
Yep.
Oh,
I
sure.
thought that was a big deal. I always wore ear protection, but not enough, evidently, because I was shooting between 100 and 200 rounds a day back then, and
Yeah.
that was just not enough. And I was surprised because I'm right-handed and shoot from the right, and the doctor says that's because your loss in the left is because the weapon actually protected your ear from the right and breaking up the
I've got the same thing where it's the left ear mostly.
Yeah.
It's funny.
There's actually a lawsuit right now against 3M about their dual-sided earplugs that they sold to the military.
Really?
Yep.
Were those the ones that had they were an orange colored one with a little aluminum cylinder in them?
Yeah, there was orange on one side and another color on the other side, yeah.
No, I mean they're orange on the rubber part is orange, but there's actually an aluminum cylinder that's inside the.
Right.
They look like a little Christmas tree, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to use those. But I figure, if that's what I'm going to get for my birthday gift is diagnosed with hearing loss, then, if it helps cover the kid's college, oh well.
Yeah. So happy birthday.
Thank you.
You want us to say it again so you can hear it?
What?
Just text it to me, Big, loud, all caps.
I expect it's coming. Anybody who is in signals intel or any kind of signals can't end up with all they're hearing. Although my husband teases me that I never miss anything, and it works very well when I'm coaching little kids who think they can swear behind my back.
Well, I was telling the audiologist that some of that high frequency hearing loss right now is convenient because I've got 2 teenagers at home. I'm just gonna tune it out.
How's that working for you?
Well, it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress. Taking some classes now on Salesforce administration, and that keeps me out of the house and line me up for whatever the next gig is. So it's good to be with another cohort of like-minded people in a similar demographic. Otherwise, it's me, the dog, and 4 cats at home.
Oh.
At least you got some company that way.
Yeah. He keeps pumping my mouse hands like boom, boom, boom. Ah, can't do anything. Get your hands off the phone and computer and pet me, It's just.
Yeah, Rob's got one of those sitting there behind him right now, keeping him company there too, don't you?
We've got 4.
You got 4?
Yeah.
Is the king of the roost sitting there behind you, or what?
Well, that's my cat.
I've got 1. That's all.
Maybe I'm hers. That's the.
I was gonna say.
I see somebody there in the back of you, Harold.
That's right. 1, and that's enough. 80 pounds of fur.
A cat?
No.
That's a hell of a cat. Oh, okay, I see.
Our dog Whiskey, he's about 33 pounds, and so he usually sleeps between my legs and makes it hard to roll over. But on a cold night, it's nice.
You have a 33-pound cat?
He thinks he's a cat, but he's a dog.
Oh.
That plus the 4 cats.
Wow.
Amanda's giving you this demonstration of the dog here.
Kitchen, so she's super excited right now because I brought her in and she's just snarfing all of she thinks good food, but it's actually celery pieces that fell on the floor.
Don't tell her.
It doesn't
They're gullible.
matter. It's people food. That's all she cares about.
Yeah,
That's
cats
right.
aren't so gullible. There's an IFMR ride coming up out west here this spring, right? Jerry, you remember seeing something about that?
I saw something about to get caught up in things. I am really struggling to get caught up in everything right now, guys.
I think it's in May.
There's one for the district conference, and it starts in Reno and goes Lake Tahoe. There's a big loop it does in one day.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that's Larry's ride.
Which district?
Oh, you would ask that, wouldn't you?
Sorry.
53 something.
Okay. So 5170 is what Oakland Club is in, and we've got our district conference on the Hornet here in Alameda. And it's also, besides being the same time that ride is out here, it's also the same time my buddies all go riding out in Tennessee. But I've got to make a choice.
I think it's posted on the website, isn't it, Linda?
It is. It's District 5190.
Reno to Tahoe day ride.
Yeah, that one.
3 pass tour.
So I'd love to actually, meet some of these people, make sure it's not just something on a screen, y'all just like Russian chatbots who talk about motorcycles or something. I just have to make timing work.
District 5190, Scott.
Okay, ours is 5170, so we'll be having the thing on the Hornet.
Jerry, were you in Uganda last?
I was in Kenya.
You finding any difference between the weather in Kenya and that in Michigan?
2 or 3 degrees.
Just a small little bit.
You could almost qualify for that Century Club, couldn't you?
I spent 5 weeks there in Guatemala, and I came back for the last 2 weeks of December and first week of January, and it was warm here. And so, and then I went down there to Kenya, which isn't as hot as you would think. I think the warmest it got was like maybe 80, 82 in the day, but we were right on the equator, but it's also a mile up in altitude. So it's pretty comfortable. And interestingly enough, most of the young people who came to help us during the day, they showed up in coats, some of them even parkas. I'm like, you're nuts. But I tell you, I had no chance to transition into this cold, and it's been nasty since. Just nasty.
Yeah.
I've got a friend who teaches over near Grand Rapids. She's on school closing day number 12 today.
Whoa.
Yeah, there's schools here that are already starting to petition the state for forgiveness.
Yep.
Well, they're doing that here too. And it's only been a couple days.
We have 13 days built into our school year because the kids go an extra 45 minutes every day. So they're quite liberal with canceling school. The kids had two-hour delays this week, and all it's done is rain. Cold rain. It was cold rain. It was gross. I mean, I didn't want to get up anyway, so it was perfect.
It's soggy out here, but I can't complain compared to the snow I grew up in.
I'm sorry, but golfing in 59-degree weather.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear you, Harold.
I think John Cram's at fault here.
What was that?
I think you're at fault here.
Probably. I've got big shoulders.
Isn't that stupid rodent in your state?
But what was that?
Isn't that stupid rodent in your state that lied to us all about the early spring?
Who knows?
I like the post I saw about that.
Yes, John.
John, you saw the post about that on Facebook. Somebody was sharing. It's like U.S. is the only country that denies climate change but trusts the rodent to predict when spring's going to arrive.
Yeah, that's us.
Yeah.
That's the most American thing I've ever heard.
You know, my favorite
He
one.
doesn't hold a candle to Wiarton Willie.
One of my favorite is, if there's global warming, why is it so cold outside?
Right.
Oh, here we go.
It's gonna downhill fast. We got 5 minutes.
I always prefer those questions.
Glenda, what's this Wiretown Willie?
The what?
Wiarton Willie?
Yeah.
Oh, he would blow Puxatawny Phil out of the water any day.
What? Oh.
There's no question.
Is he another rodent?
He is an albino groundhog.
Ooh.
What?
You can find any old brown groundhog anywhere. You can't find very many albino ones.
That's because it's so cold up there.
It's too much time underground. He's just lost all his tan.
He has a $20,000 home.
What?
And I on our way home from the ride in Virginia in June, I made my group stop by Puxatawny Phil to check him out. And yeah, we got him hands down. Sorry.
So you have a polar groundhog, is that what you're saying?
No, he's not polar, but when you guys were talking about the weather, I was plowing snow with my car coming home tonight from work, so I don't feel bad for you at 59 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was this close to being warm enough to take the top off of the Jeep on the way home today.
Yeah, right.
It was almost 50 here, Jerry. It's supposed to be gross 30 tomorrow. But...
You poor folks.
You know what?
Right on top is snow, which means more ice.
I had to ride in the rain last night and my gloves got wet.
Oh, poor baby.
Oh, no. You know, actually, somebody asked me the other day if I liked being stationed in Monterey. And they're like, oh, the weather must have been great. And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it rained every single day I was there, actually.
I am
I need to come try California again.
I'm district trainer this year, and our training circuit has started. Last weekend we did assistant governor training, and then now we have a whole bunch of these pets orientations or pre-test training to do, as well as the President-elect training seminar coming up in March. So I'm stuck here. I can't just hop a plane and get out of here right now. It sucks.
But you do your AG training separate from your pets?
We did.
Yeah, we do it in this.
Our multi-district plats does something for AGs as well, but we had some things to get sorted out and straightened, and we had a really good session. We really did.
Yeah, I saw Rhonda's posting this last week. She didn't seem too happy with your district.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Yeah, enough said. There are some things that happened that I agree with, and some of the things I agree with some of the things she said, how things were handled, but the reality is we have had over the last, 3 or 4 years now, some great people apply to be governor, and any one of them would have been a decent governor. So I don't think she was slighted. I can tell you some things were handled really poorly, though. So.
I get baffled hearing about the interreactions between governors and their successors. We have one close to us where the outgoing district governor refused to go to the induction of the incoming. And I'm sitting there looking at our district. We all get along, at least on the surface.
Too much ego.
We're down to the last 2 minutes. Go ahead, Chris. You had something.
No, I said to John, too much ego.
You got that right.
DGs with ego? Tell me it ain't so.
Yeah, you all know what ego stands for, right?
Go ahead.
Edging God out.
I've not heard that before.
I like it.
I've told all of them that have followed me and stuff when I get a chance to sit and talk to them about some of the real stuff. Okay, I said, look, if it comes July 1st, the first day you're past district governor, and you wish you still had the job, you didn't do it right. Anybody that's done the job and done it right doesn't want that job again.
I take issue with that. I enjoyed my time as district governor, and although I'm glad I'm not anymore, somebody else has it.
I had an amazing time as district governor, but I put it all in and all on the line for that year, and it's not my job anymore.
You're the loyal, not the opposition, but you support your governor.
You betcha.
All right. Jerry.
Yes.
You want to lead us in the four-way test?
Four-way test of things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, is it beneficial to all concerned? Fifth, it's going to be fun. And sixth, will anybody find out?
Hey, Jerry, can you hang on for a minute after everybody goes?
Sure.
Yep. You guys stay warm.
Yep.
Next week. Still have a way to go to California.
Have a good
Don't
weekend.
visit yourself. Just don't stay.
Bye all.
Have a
Good
good
week, all.